promotion about Cooper? Is it a promotion about Cooper?
Well, good morning, colleagues. Let me welcome you to this Cabinet team and to the next stage of our journey as we move from the stage of fixing foundations now on to the stage of national renewal.
The rise and fall of Angela Rayner, a political reckoning. Right then, before we dive into today's absolutely explosive analysis, if you're not already subscribed to UK Connors, what are you waiting for? We're the channel that tells you what Westminster doesn't want you to hear. Hit that subscribe button now because, trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The political landscape has shifted dramatically, and at the center of it all stands one of the most polarizing figures in modern British politics. Angela Rayner, the self-proclaimed champion of the working classes, the so-called Red Queen of the North, has become the lightning rod for everything that's wrong with contemporary Labour politics. But here's the thing that'll make your blood boil. The very people she claims to represent are the ones who had quite enough of her antics. Let's be brutally honest about what we're witnessing here. This isn't just about one politician's missteps or unfortunate sound bites. This is about the fundamental disconnect between what the political class thinks the public wants to hear and what ordinary, hard-working British citizens actually need from their representatives. Rayner has become the poster child for this disconnect, and frankly, it's been a long time coming. Now, I know some of you are thinking, here we go again, another attack on a working-class woman who's made it in politics. But hold your horses there. This analysis isn't about her background or her gender. It's about her conduct, her hypocrisy, and her complete failure to live up to the standard we should rightfully expect from someone in her position. And speaking of standards, if you appreciate this kind of no-nonsense political analysis, make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started with the revelations today. The Tory scum incident wasn't just an unfortunate slip of the tongue. It was a window into the soul of modern Labour politics. When Rayner stood up and branded Conservative politicians as homophobic, racist, misogynistic, absolutely disgusting, nasty, Etonian pieces of scum, she wasn't just insulting her political opponents. She was insulting every single person who had ever voted Conservative, every person who had ever held centre-right views, every person who believed in personal responsibility and traditional British values. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is where Rayner's argument completely falls apart. She accused the Conservatives of being homophobic, this from the party that gave us David Cameron legalizing same-sex marriage. She called them misogynistic, this about the party that's had 4 female leaders, including the longest-serving Prime Minister of the 20th century, whilst Labour, the supposed party of equality, has managed precisely 0 female leaders in its entire history. The sheer audacity of these claims would be laughable if they weren't so damaging to our political discourse. This is what passes for intellectual rigor in the modern Labour Party. Throw around inflammatory accusations, hope they stick, and when challenged, simply shout louder about your working-class credentials. Now, before anyone starts clutching their pearls about political civility, let me be clear, robust political debate is the lifeblood of democracy. Margaret Thatcher wasn't exactly known for her gentle approach to political discourse, and she certainly didn't come from privilege. The grocer's daughter from Grantham knew how to throw a political punch when necessary, but she also knew how to govern, how to lead, and most importantly, how to maintain the dignity of her office. The difference is stark and telling. Thatcher's confrontational style was backed by substance, by conviction, by a clear vision for Britain's future. Rayner's approach seems to be confrontation for its own sake, designed more to generate headlines and social media engagement than to advance any coherent political agenda. If you're finding this analysis as eye-opening as I suspect you are, then you absolutely need to subscribe to UK Connors right now. We're the only channel brave enough to call out this nonsense from across the political spectrum. But let's dig deeper into what this really represents. Rayner's political trajectory is a masterclass in how not to build a sustainable political career. She's positioned herself as the authentic voice of working-class Britain, the woman who tells it like it is, who won't be silenced by the establishment. Yet at every turn, she's demonstrated behavior that would be unacceptable in any workplace, let alone in the upper echelons of government. The vaping incidents, the questionable tax arrangements, the inflammatory rhetoric, these aren't isolated incidents. They are part of a pattern that suggests someone who believes the rules that apply to everyone else simply don't apply to her. This isn't about working-class authenticity. It's about basic professional standards and personal accountability. And here's what's really galling about the whole situation. The defense of her behavior has consistently fallen back on class and gender. Any criticism of Rayner is immediately reframed as an attack on working-class women in politics. This is not just intellectually dishonest, it's deeply insulting to the many working-class women who conduct themselves with dignity and professionalism in public life. The reality is that Britain has always celebrated politicians from humble backgrounds who've risen to positions of power and influence. We admire those who've overcome adversity, who worked their way up through merit and determination. What we don't admire is entitlement disguised as authenticity, or the weaponization of personal background to deflect from legitimate criticism. Make sure you're subscribed, because what I'm about to tell you next will absolutely astound you about the level of hypocrisy we're dealing with here. Rayner's political brand has been built on attacking privilege, attacking the establishment, attacking anyone who doesn't fit her narrow definition of authenticity. Yet her own conduct suggests someone who believes she's entitled to a different set of rules, someone who thinks her background gives her a free pass to behave however she likes. This isn't about suppressing working-class voices in politics. Quite the opposite. It's about ensuring that working-class politicians are held to the same high standards as everyone else, rather than being patronized with lower expectations. The suggestion that criticism of Rayner's behavior is somehow classist is itself deeply classist, implying that working-class people can't be expected to maintain professional standards. The British public isn't stupid. They can distinguish between authentic working-class representation and performative working-class politics. They can tell the difference between someone who's genuinely fighting for their interests and someone who's using their background as a political prop. This is why Rayner's support has been hemorrhaging, not among the middle-class metropolitan elite who never liked her anyway, but among the very working-class voters she claims to champion. They are tired of being represented by someone who seems more interested in Twitter feuds and inflammatory sound bites than in the serious business of governance. The tragedy here is that there was genuine potential for Rayner to be a transformative figure in British politics. A working-class woman rising to high office should be celebrated, should be an inspiration to young people from similar backgrounds. Instead, she's become a cautionary tale about how not to conduct yourself in public life. Her trajectory from rising star to political liability tells us something profound about the state of modern politics. We live in an age where authenticity is prized above competence, where being relatable is considered more important than being effective. Rayner embodied this trend, and her downfall reveals its inherent flaws. If you're concerned about the direction of British politics as I am, then subscribing to UK Connors is absolutely essential. We're committed to holding all politicians accountable, regardless of their party or their background. The question now is what happens next. Labour finds itself in the uncomfortable position of having to distance itself from someone who was supposed to be a key part of their electoral appeal. The party that branded itself as the voice of working Britain has been forced to acknowledge that their most prominent working-class politician has become an electoral liability. This creates a fascinating dynamic within the Labour Party. The left-wing activists who champion Rayner as their authentic voice now have to grapple with the reality that authenticity without competence is politically worthless. The moderate wing of the party, who always had reservations about her approach, can now point to her declining popularity as evidence that their concerns were justified. But here's what's really interesting about this whole saga. It reveals the deep tensions within modern progressive politics about class, representation, and standards. The same people who demand the highest ethical standards from conservative politicians have consistently made excuses for Rayner's behavior because she fits their narrative of working-class authenticity. This double standard has been glaringly obvious to ordinary voters, who expect consistency in how politicians are judged regardless of their background. The idea that different standards should apply based on someone's class origins is not just unfair, it's fundamentally undemocratic. The British political system works best when it's a meritocracy, where people rise based on their abilities, their dedication, and their service to the public good. When we start applying different standards based on identity categories, we undermine the very principles that make our democracy strong. Rayner's case study perfectly illustrates this point. She's been given chance after chance, excuse after excuse, not because of her political effectiveness or her contribution to public discourse, but because she ticks certain demographic boxes that progressives find appealing. This isn't empowerment. It's condescension dressed up as inclusivity. Subscribe to UK Connors now if you want more of this kind of fearless analysis that cuts through the political spin and tells you what's really happening in Westminster. The damage to Labour's brand has been significant and long-lasting. Every time Rayner opened her mouth, she reinforced negative stereotypes about the modern Labour Party, that it's more interested in identity politics than practical solutions, more concerned with virtue signaling than effective governance, more focused on attacking opponents than building a better Britain. This isn't just about one politician's personal failings. It's about what those failings reveal about the political culture that elevated and protected her. The same progressive ecosystem that celebrates working-class politicians when they conform to acceptable narratives has been remarkably quick to abandon Rayner when she became politically inconvenient. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. The same commentators who spent years telling us that any criticism of Rayner was evidence of class prejudice are now quietly distancing themselves as her poll numbers collapse. The same political allies who defended her most outrageous statements are now briefing anonymously about her being a liability. This reveals something profound about progressive politics in Britain today. It's transactional, not principled. Working-class politicians are celebrated when they are useful and discarded when they become inconvenient. The commitment to working-class representation turns out to be remarkably shallow when it conflicts with electoral arithmetic. The British public has watched this whole charade with a mixture of bemusement and disgust. They've seen through the performative aspects of Rayner's political persona from the beginning. They recognize that someone who constantly talks about fighting for working people whilst engaging in behavior that would get most working people fired probably isn't the authentic champion she claims to be. This disconnect between political class perception and public reality has been one of the most fascinating aspects of the Rayner phenomenon. The Westminster bubble convinced itself that her combative style and working-class background made her an electoral asset, whilst ordinary voters were increasingly repelled by her conduct and rhetoric. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because we're about to explore exactly how this disconnect developed and why it matters for the future of British politics. The media's role in the Rayner saga has been particularly instructive. Large sections of the progressive media spent years defending her behavior, explaining away her controversies, and attacking anyone who dared to criticize her conduct. They convinced themselves that they were standing up for working-class representation, when in reality they were enabling behavior that damaged both Labour's electoral prospects and the cause of working-class advancement in politics. This protective bubble around Rayner prevented her from receiving the kind of honest feedback that might have helped her develop into a more effective politician. Instead of being encouraged to moderate her rhetoric and professionalize her conduct, she was praised for her authenticity and told that any criticism was evidence of establishment bias. The result was a politician who became increasingly detached from public opinion whilst believing herself to be its authentic voice. This is a dangerous dynamic in democratic politics, where public accountability is supposed to be the ultimate check on political behavior. The international dimension of this story is also worth considering. Britain's reputation for political stability and mature democratic discourse has been significantly damaged by the kind of rhetoric that Rayner exemplified. When senior politicians routinely refer to their opponents as scum and engage in a kind of inflammatory language that will be considered unacceptable in most professional contexts, it reflects poorly on our political culture as a whole. Other democratic countries look to Britain as an example of how parliamentary democracy should function. The mother of parliaments is supposed to set standards for political discourse, not race to the bottom in pursuit of social media engagement and tabloid headlines. Rayner's conduct has contributed to a broader coarsening of our political culture that serves nobody's interests. When political discourse becomes purely adversarial, when opponents are demonized rather than debated, when personal attacks replace policy arguments, democracy itself suffers. The tragedy is that Rayner had the opportunity to be a different kind of politician. She could have used her background and her platform to elevate political discourse, to show that working-class politicians could maintain the highest standards whilst fighting for their constituents. Instead, she chose a path of controversy and confrontation. This choice hasn't just damaged her own career prospects, it's made it harder for future working-class politicians to be taken seriously. Every time a working-class candidate seeks high office, they'll be measured against the Rayner standard, and that's not a comparison that serves anyone well. If you're passionate about seeing better standards in British politics, then subscribing to UK Connors is essential. We're committed to holding all politicians accountable to the standards that our democracy deserves. The lessons from Angela Rayner's political trajectory are clear and urgent. British politics works best when it rewards competence, integrity, and public service, regardless of background or identity. When we start applying different standards based on demographic characteristics, we undermine the meritocratic principles that should govern our democracy. The public has rendered its verdict on the Rayner experiment, and that verdict is unequivocally negative. They rejected the idea that inflammatory rhetoric and identity politics can substitute for effective governance and mature political leadership. This rejection isn't based on prejudice or bias. It's based on a clear-eyed assessment of what works in British politics and what doesn't. The British people have consistently shown that they are willing to support politicians from any background who demonstrate competence, integrity, and genuine commitment to public service. What they won't tolerate is entitlement, hypocrisy, and the weaponization of personal background to deflect from legitimate criticism. Rayner embodied all of these negative traits, and a political downfall was entirely predictable and richly deserved. The question now is whether the Labour Party learns the right lesson from this experience. Will they recognize that authentic working-class representation requires high standards, not lower expectations? Will they understand that identity politics is a poor substitute for effective policymaking? Will they acknowledge that the British public is more sophisticated than their political strategists assumed? The early signs are not encouraging. Rather than engaging in honest self-reflection about what went wrong with the Rayner project, there's been a tendency to blame external factors: the media, conservative attacks, public prejudice. This kind of defensive reaction suggests that the lessons haven't been learned, and that similar mistakes will be repeated. For the Conservative Party, Rayner's downfall represents both an opportunity and a warning. The opportunity is obvious. Labour's most prominent working-class politician has been neutralised as an electoral threat. But the warning is equally important. British politics punishes politicians who lose touch with public sentiment, regardless of their party affiliation. The future of British politics depends on our ability to maintain high standards for all politicians whilst ensuring that opportunities for advancement remain open to people from all backgrounds. The Rayner case study shows. Subscribe to UK Connors right now, because the political developments we're tracking will reshape British politics for years to come, and you won't want to miss our analysis of what happens next. The broader implications of this story extend far beyond one politician's career. We're witnessing a fundamental shift in how the British public evaluates political authenticity. The old model, where working-class background automatically conferred credibility and protection from criticism, is dead. The new model demands that all politicians, regardless of their background, meet the same high standards of conduct and competence. This is actually a more democratic and meritocratic approach, but it requires political parties to adapt their strategies and messaging accordingly. Angela Rayner's rise and fall will be studied by political scientists for years to come as a perfect example of how not to build a sustainable political career in modern Britain. Her story serves as a cautionary tale for anyone who believes that identity can substitute for integrity, that background can excuse behavior, or that authenticity can replace competence. The British political system is ultimately self-correcting. Politicians who serve the public interest and maintain appropriate standards tend to succeed over the long term, whilst those who don't eventually face the consequences of their choices. Rayner's trajectory perfectly illustrates this principle in action. As we look to the future of British politics, the lessons from Angela Rayner's experience should guide us toward a more mature and effective political culture. We need politicians who combine authenticity with competence, who maintain high standards whilst fighting for their constituents, who understand that public service is a privilege that comes with responsibilities. The British people deserve better than the kind of political theatre that Rayner specialised in. They deserve representatives who take their responsibilities seriously, who conduct themselves with dignity, and who focus on solving problems rather than creating controversy. That's exactly the kind of analysis you will get from UK Connors, honest, unflinching, and focus on what really matters for the future of our democracy. Subscribe now, because the political landscape is changing rapidly, and we're your guide to understanding what it all means. The Angela Rayner story isn't just about one politician's downfall. It's about the kind of country we want to be and the standards we're willing to accept from our political leaders. The British public has spoken clearly on this question, and their message is unmistakable. We expect better, we deserve better, and we won't settle for less. Stay with UK Connors as we continue to monitor these crucial developments in British politics. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and join the conversation in the comments below. The future of our democracy depends on citizens like you staying informed and engaged with the political process. Until next time, this has been UK Connors, and we'll see you in the next video.